Hello, everybody. Thanks for joining me once again. You're listening to Chris Hattingh, researcher at the Free Market Foundation. I'm recording this podcast on Monday, the 3rd of June, 2019. Yesterday, being Sunday, the 2nd of June, 2019, it came out in the media that former SAA CEO Vuyani Jarana had tendered his resignation from the state-owned enterprise. He is yet another CEO to resign from an SOE, and it follows on the news that former Eskom CEO Phakamani Hadebe had also resigned last week, on the 24th of May specifically. Now, I'm hoping that Jarana's resignation hasn't caught anyone by too much surprise. Change is the name of the game at our South African SOEs, and change without any real change, without substantial difference. We get CEO after CEO and board after board and turnaround strategy after turnaround strategy, and none of them result in any real change. Unfortunately, these SOEs keep on being bailed out. They have financial failure after financial failure, and then the government uses taxpayer money to bail them out to keep them afloat. It's different arguments to justify these actions. For example, pride in SAA. It's used to encourage tourism, apparently, even though private airlines such as SA Airlink and Comair, it's Kulula and British Airways, can very easily fill the gap that SAA is supposedly filling. To use tourism as an excuse to justify all the bailouts makes very, very little sense. The proof is simply not in the pudding. Even last week, United Airlines announced that, in the last month, it's come out that United Airlines have reached an agreement with Cape Town for direct flights between New York and Cape Town. And of course, United is a United States airline, and they're actively trying to encourage tourism to South Africa. So it's not like we need SAA for this. And even if SAA was the only airline in the country, it simply can't cater for all the travelers, both locally and internationally, because of mismanagement. That's because it's a state-owned enterprise. We know that SOEs, they cannot account for actual market forces, supply and demand, and that kind of thing. They don't have to act on a bottom line or a profit motive on concepts such as breaking even, unfortunately, because they keep on getting bailed out. It doesn't matter what mistakes they make. They know that they don't have to act as a normal business would. Now, a normal business or company or enterprise, whatever you want to call it, that board is accountable to the shareholders, as is the CEO, and if they don't perform, then at the hopefully monthly, quarterly review, they'll be held accountable and things will change. This is not the case with SAA or with Eskom, of course, because they don't need to worry about actual performance. They know that the government will always stand there. They always have their back. And government, at the end of the day, is the representative of the taxpayer. Government has no wealth or money of its own. The only wealth it gets in or generates, in scare quotes, is through taxes. That's why government keeps on hiking taxes, because its coffers are running dry, because it keeps spending money on things such as SAA and Eskom. These two SOEs are a huge drain on South Africa's fiscus, and the risk of them defaulting on their debt keeps on increasing the longer we keep them around. And once one of them goes down, it's going to have a serious negative effect on the whole South African economy, and might lead to many of the rating agencies classifying South Africa's investment grade as junk status, which again will have serious consequences, and not just for richer people. We shouldn't make the mistake of thinking that these things are simply concerns for richer white people in South Africa. When investment leaves, when the rand, the currency weakens, it's going to have a much bigger negative effect on poorer people, because their money will not go as far. The government might at some point seriously pursue inflation, and that leads to an even greater weakening of our currency. For poorer people, their money is not going nearly as far as it used to. For example, they have to travel far to get to their jobs and that kind of thing. And now they have to spend more money on fuel and transportation costs. Food is continually increasing. The threat of expropriation without compensation will make it more and more difficult for farmers to stay in the country, and that's going to threaten our food security. So all these things work, not against each other, but they all work sort of in congruence to lead to the very difficult economic conditions we currently see in South Africa. And manifestation of that, for example, is the almost 10 million unemployed people in the country. So all these things factor in on each other, and they all result in the difficult situation we currently sit with in the country. Sorry, there was a little bit of a tangent, but just to take us back to SAA. Now, on SAA and Eskom, they both have a combined outstanding debt of close to 500 billion, which is incredible to think about in a country like South Africa with its shrinking tax base, that the government is using the funds it has to bail out these SOEs. There's no logical or moral justification for the government to be involved in either an airline or electricity generation. It makes zero sense. And Jarana's resignation is just the latest example of the problems at South African Airways, and why it's really seriously time for Minister of Public Enterprises Pravin Gordhan to very seriously consider privatizing the SAA, or at least selling government's stake in it. Government can maybe retain a 20 or 10% stake if it must. And then SAA could be run as a private airline. They can keep the flag, etc. All those arguments about pride and that kind of thing, they can keep that. But SAA must be run as a private airline if it is to have any hope at any point of turning around. SAA has not made a profit, has not been profitable since 2011. That's now, the years are just piling up, and every year almost it feels like we get turnaround strategy after turnaround strategy and CEO after CEO, and we get told and promised that things will turn around this time. Just give us a little bit more time, a little bit more of your hard-earned taxpayer money, and we'll turn around. And the proof is simply not in the pudding. It is in the very nature of SOEs that they cannot work well and without bailouts, and at the end of the day, those bailouts come from the taxpayer. Interestingly, I'm reading now from a piece on Business Live. If you're interested, you can find it there on their website. They have obtained, I think, Jarana's resignation letter, and he cites, and I quote, slow decision-making and red tape at the airline, as well as blurred lines of accountability for his departure, end quote. Now, if anyone thought that SOEs or that government in general can run things well, they probably haven't encountered much government in their lives yet. Maybe they're younger than some of us. But anything the government gets its hands on becomes complicated and drawn out by its nature. Government is not efficient. That is not a word we would associate with anything the government does, unfortunately. And this is simply now a case of, we shouldn't think that government only over-regulates the private sector and private businesses and companies. It seems like, from what Jarana is saying in his letter, that government even over-regulates its own companies. This is, I guess, the left hand of government not knowing what the right hand is doing. And this isn't to say that failures won't happen in the private sector, that companies, don't mess up and that kind of thing. They make the wrong decisions. But by the nature of government being involved in a company, now in the case of SAA, it takes much, much longer to sort out any problems that might arise. And this results in the continued growth of the debt. It simply cannot be solved because there are too many people involved. There are too many hoops that need to be jumped through. Probably there's, different people from different departments who have competing interests, and the bigger the pie, so in this case, the profit as such, if we want to call it, that SAA makes, the more people want to be involved, and the more they're going to compete with each other, undermine each other, that kind of thing, to get their share of, what they see as profit, which again, I go back to this, at the end of the day, is taxpayer money. Jarana also says in his letter on Business Live, it's not the exact letter, but they sort of paraphrase, he also points to the need to constantly run decisions past the Department of Public Enterprises, and that the Treasury systematically undermined his efforts to pursue a turnaround strategy, and, for example, to nimbly respond to the challenges facing the airline. He's just piling on, I guess, more reasons here why we shouldn't have SAA. He's making clear that it was very difficult for him to try and turn around the airline. I'm not sure if he wanted sort of a blank check from Treasury to just spend as much as he thought needed, and in that case, if that was the case, I'm glad Treasury and Pravin Gordhan didn't give him that, because that would have resulted in even higher losses, unfortunately. But it's sort of sad in a way, because we are just going back to a few weeks, President Ramaphosa's inauguration. we saw those SAA planes flying, and it's beautiful to see them. It's highly enjoyable, even if you're not an aviation enthusiast, just for any South Africans seeing those planes. But then you think about the amount of taxpayer money that's been wasted on the airline, how much money has gone into keeping those planes up in the air. And, Jarana here gives us all these words and points to many, many reasons for why South African Airways is in the bad situation it is, and why he's leaving. You cannot, with aviation being what it is, Ethiopian Airlines and Emirates specifically in Africa, they're growing a lot and probably squeezing out SAA. SAA would need to be run as a seriously lean, efficient private airline if it were to have any chance with competing with Emirates and Ethiopian Airlines, specifically in Africa. I think those airlines are going to try and take even more and more of SAA's market share, and full credit to them. SAA is probably shooting itself in the foot more times than not, and for them it's going to be easy to move in and take over that market share. Maybe Emirates will buy SAA at some point. We're not sure. We'll have to see what would happen. Another idea that's been floated, I know many in government would be scared of privatization and the results, of what might result from that. But another option apart from selling government stake in SAA, would be a sort of shareholder model where every South African owns a share in SAA, and then maybe it'll be run in a more accountable manner to the people. But I'm not sure if that would actually work. I think at this point SAA can't be saved. It should simply be closed down, or at least the rights for the name and the flag should be sold to a private entity or corporation, and then it can be run as a proper private airline, competing with Comair, SA Airlink, for example, and now United Airlines. And then from there, we'll hopefully see the results. When there's more competition in the sector, we see the lowering of prices and better options for consumers and customers. And then, of course, when you're not happy with the service, you can hopefully get a refund and then go to a different airline. If SAA were, for example, a monopoly in South Africa, it is in effect, but because it's government backed. But if it were the only airline in South Africa, imagine how difficult it would be for you to travel around the country, never mind traveling overseas. It would be probably quite mind-boggling. Just a few more things I would like to mention from the piece on Business Live. It's also mentioned that trust levels are very low within SAA, despite assurances from the state that funding would be made available. And the airline has also struggled to pay salaries. So for all people's concerns about what about privatization and people will lose their jobs and what's going to happen to them, it's not like they're getting paid now in any case. The funding simply isn't there anymore. At this point, whenever SAA gets money from the government, again from the South African taxpayer, that has to be used to pay off their debt. So it's almost never going to break even. I guess it's a vicious cycle in a way. They're never going to reach that point where they can even pay all their employees, their pilots, their staff, etc., what they should get for their work. I'd like to quote Jarana again, where he says, and I quote, "One of the areas of concern is speed of decision making. It is impossible to succeed in the turnaround with the current level of bureaucracy we have to go through to implement the strategy." End quote. This is not to say that no one in government doesn't want to do a good job, isn't concerned about the state of SAA actually, but those sort of intentions are irrelevant. Intentions don't always matter, shouldn't matter just on their own. It should also, actions and results should also matter. You can't just say you have noble intentions. And here they might be very noble in their intentions to save SAA, but the result of government involvement is bureaucracy. Government wants to have oversight over everything it gets involved in, and it has certain conditions and prerequisites. And by virtue of being bureaucrats and politicians, they're not aware of the intricacies of the market. Maybe, I don't know, let's say Emirates drops a certain area in Africa, and Jarana, for a thought experiment, maybe Jarana wanted to request 3 planes, of a certain type from Airbus or Boeing, and he wanted to buy them, and he recognized an opportunity. It would take him too long to go through all the hoops in government to actually get those planes, and the opportunity would be lost. So it doesn't surprise me that he was upset about how long it took. It comes as no surprise. The latest turnaround strategy, which promised, I guess, that SAA would be able to break even by 2021 requires 21.7 billion rand in funding, and the full amount has not been made available. But I think the fact that SAA currently has a credit facility of 3.5 billion, I think this will be depleted very, very quickly. Maybe SAA will simply close down sort of in the night, and there won't be much hullabaloo about it. We can hope that happens because the funds are running out, and I hope that government doesn't keep on pouring money into this black hole. Never mind, we can debate the morality of taxation and that kind of thing, but we aren't seeing any product or result for the taxes that we are paying into SAA for the bailout. There's no discernible benefit. So that makes it almost even more insulting to the South African taxpayer that they're spending all this money and nothing seems to be working. Adding at the same time, I would like to add, if SAA were a private company, it might still make mistakes, it might fail in some ways, but at least then there would be more accountability and it would be better able to address the needs of the market and the situation. Right now, there are too many ministers and people in the way for anyone at SAA to go through. Maybe the airline itself could be okay, but because it's so intricately involved with government and all the tentacles and bureaucracy, I don't foresee anything close to a good turnaround or even profit anytime soon. For the people who are currently working there, hopefully they can take their skills and expertise to other airlines. If SAA were to be closed down, I really hope that they get that opportunity. Now it's sort of hanging over their heads that the government will always be there helping them, but that could also end at some point. So it creates a real sense of, it's not a good corporate culture. It's not a good place to work in. Imagine the stress and that kind of thing, going to work every day, wondering whether you'll receive money from government or not. It can't be a good environment for those people. I'd also like to point out that Finance Minister Tito Mboweni has before said if it were up to him, he would close SAA, and perhaps he can get enough clout now in the new cabinet and the new administration of Cyril Ramaphosa to try and convince others to support him. I really, really, really hope that this actually becomes a reality. At least he realizes the economic reality of what's going on at SAA. No matter your ideological views, if you think government should be involved in something like an airline, if you think it plays some sort of developmental role, you have to realize that the money is running out. It already has run out in the past, and you have to make the decision now to cut your losses while you can, while there's still a little bit of something to salvage, because it's really it's past the point of farce, I think, with Jarana's resignation. So listeners, bit of depressing news on a Monday, but maybe this will be yet another nail in the coffin of SAA, the fact that Vuyani Jarana has resigned. We can only hope that government is actually going to realize that it can't keep this thing afloat with our money. If it's going to spend money on anything, it should focus on healthcare for poorer people, something like that. Something where it can spend its money in a way that we can see the results of. With the continued bailouts of SAA and Eskom, we simply see government pouring money into these vanity projects. Maybe it's a case of pride, I don't know. But they need to step back and let the private sector move in and take over. Last year, for example, SA Express was grounded by the Civil Aviation Authority in South Africa, a few issues there. And then Airlink and Comair stepped in very quickly and took on those passengers. They made sure that they got to their destinations and et cetera, et cetera. The profit motive is a highly motivating thing. We should let it work in aviation in South Africa as well. Maybe we can see some growth and some progress, hopefully some new companies. And that'll always be good for the consumer. Competition will hopefully result in lower prices and better options and that kind of thing. So, listeners, thanks for tuning in once again to my podcast. I hope that you learned something from the figures and from Jarana's words. Hopefully at some point we can do an in-depth case study on SAA, sort of its history, see all the different stages and track the line from when the state got involved and how it's not devolved. It might go well for a few years, but by virtue of the state being involved in a company, it's always going to fall apart at some point. And SAA, it needs to be taken out of South African skies at this point. I think there's very little left to salvage, and now is the time for government to act. I hope that Jarana's resignation will be the final sort of impetus for government to actually do something about SAA and not keep on promising us, things, new CEOs and turnaround strategies and that kind of thing. So thank you once again for listening. Please share and like my podcast and all the others on our channel. Please let other people know all the figures, how much we've dumped into SAA over the years and why it's now time for it to be closed down. I'll talk to you again probably this week, if not on the Free Marketeers group podcast, which we have every Friday. And you can, of course, find any new episodes that we might post on our YouTube channel. Please also follow us on Facebook and Twitter. Bye.